The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard of a modest house on the outskirts of Cedar Grove, a small town where everyone knew each other but few really connected. 7-year-old Tommy Mitchell sat cross-legged in the dirt, his small fingers tracing patterns in the earth, while the sound of distant traffic hummed like a lullaby of loneliness. The wooden fence that enclosed the yard creaked in the warm breeze, its weathered boards telling stories of better days, much like the house itself. Tommy's world had shrunk considerably since his mother's passing 18 months ago. The vibrant colors that once painted his childhood had faded to muted tones of grief and routine. His father, Jack, a construction worker with calloused hands and tired eyes, did his best to keep their little family afloat, but the void left by Sarah Mitchell's absence seemed to grow wider with each passing day. The boy's bedroom window overlooked Main Street, where other children would pass by with their parents, their laughter floating up like forgotten melodies. Tommy would press his palm against the cool glass, watching them through eyes that had aged beyond their years. His teachers at Cedar Grove Elementary noticed how he would linger at the edges of the playground during recess, clutching his lunch bag like a shield against the world. "Tommy," Ms. Reynolds would say gently, "why don't you join the others playing basketball?" But Tommy would just shake his head, his sandy brown hair falling across his eyes, providing another barrier between himself and the world he couldn't quite figure out how to rejoin. The house itself seemed to share their grief, its rooms too quiet, too empty. Photographs of happier times lined the walls. Tommy's mother with her bright smile and warm eyes, holding him as a toddler, Jack with his arm around them both at the local fair. These images served as windows to a past that felt increasingly distant, like trying to remember a dream upon waking. Jack would return home each evening, his shoulders heavy with the weight of single parenthood and long hours at the construction site. He'd heat up microwave dinners or order pizza, a tempting conversation that often dissolved into uncomfortable silence. The television would fill the void between them, its artificial chatter a poor substitute for the family discussions that used to animate their evening meals. "How was school today, buddy?" Jack would ask, his voice rough with exhaustion. "Fine," Tommy would reply, pushing peas around his plate, the clink of his fork against ceramic punctuating the space between words unsaid. The neighborhood kids had mostly stopped asking Tommy to play after weeks of declined invitations. Mrs. Henderson next door would sometimes bring over cookies, her kind eyes filled with concern as she watched Tommy retreat to his room. "He just needs time," she'd tell Jack, but time seemed to be stretching the distance rather than healing it. Tommy found solace in drawing, filling notebook after notebook with scenes from the life he remembered and the one he wished he had. His art teacher, Mr. Collins, kept a special drawer in his desk for Tommy's work, recognizing the pain and longing expressed in each careful stroke of crayon and pencil. The seasons changed slowly in Cedar Grove, but Tommy's world remained static, frozen in the moment his mother left. Spring flowers bloomed and withered, summer heat shimmered above the asphalt, and autumn painted the trees in colors his mother would have loved. Yet Tommy remained tethered to his solitude, watching life pass by through the lens of loss. Their house sat at the end of Maple Drive, where the pavement gave way to gravel and eventually dirt. The location had once seemed perfect, close enough to town for convenience, but far enough for privacy. Now it felt like an island, separated from the mainland of normal life by a sea of grief neither Tommy nor Jack knew how to navigate. The garden his mother had lovingly tended now grew wild with weeds, though Tommy would sometimes water the stubborn roses that refused to give up, their red petals a splash of defiance against the general decay. He'd overheard Jack talking on the phone late one night about maybe selling the house, moving somewhere new, somewhere without memories etched into every corner. The thought made Tommy's stomach twist with anxiety. This house, despite its emptiness, was all he had left of his mother. Each morning, Tommy would wake to the sound of his father's truck starting, the engine's rumble a reminder that another day of solitude lay ahead. He'd get ready for school mechanically, pouring cereal into a bowl, the sound of dry flakes hitting ceramic echoing in the quiet kitchen. The walk to the bus stop was a daily exercise in invisibility, keeping his head down, counting cracks in the sidewalk, trying not to notice the other kids walking in groups, their backpacks bouncing with each step, their voices carrying across the morning air. The teachers at school had developed a silent understanding about Tommy. They didn't call on him unless he raised his hand, which was rare, and they paired him with kind, patient partners for group work. His grades remained good, excellent, even, but his participation in class had dwindled to almost nothing. He had become a ghost in his own life, present but barely visible, moving through the world like a shadow at noon. The local counselor, Dr. Martinez, had suggested to Jack that Tommy might benefit from therapy, but between the cost and Jack's demanding work schedule, the idea remained just that, an idea, floating in the space between good intentions and reality. Instead, Tommy continued to retreat further into himself, his world shrinking to the size of his bedroom, the yard, and the well-worn path between home and school. Some nights, Tommy would climb onto the roof outside his bedroom window, a secret habit his father would have forbidden had he known. From there, he could see the lights of Cedar Grove spread out before him like a constellation of other lives, other families, other stories. He'd imagine his mother somewhere among those lights, watching over him, and sometimes he'd whisper to her about his day, about how much he missed her laugh, about how Dad seemed to be forgetting how to smile. The neighborhood had changed since his mother's passing, or perhaps it was Tommy's perception that had shifted. The friendly waves from passing cars seemed fewer, the weekend sounds of children playing had grown distant, and even the stray cats his mother used to feed had found other places to call home. The world had moved on while Tommy remained stuck in place, like a record needle caught in a groove, playing the same sad song over and over. Jack tried his best to bridge the gap between them. He'd bring home model airplanes for them to build together, rent movies he thought Tommy might enjoy, or suggest weekend trips to the nearby lake. But these efforts often felt forced, like trying to repair a broken window with tape. The cracks still showed, the draft still crept in. Tommy's room became his sanctuary, filled with books about animals, adventures, and far-off places. He'd spend hours reading about brave explorers and loyal companions, losing himself in stories where tragedy could be overcome, where heroes emerged from ordinary circumstances, where happy endings weren't just possible but guaranteed. His mother had always encouraged his love of reading, and now books became a connection to her memory. Each page turned a conversation they could no longer have in person. The fence around their yard had seen better days, its paint peeling like old scabs, the gate hinges crying out for oil. Tommy would sometimes sit by the gate, watching through the gaps between boards as cars passed on the road beyond, each one carrying people to somewhere else, somewhere better perhaps. He developed the habit of keeping bits of his lunch in his pockets, not out of hunger, but out of a vague sense that someone or something might need it more than he did. The days blended into one another, a watercolor painting left in the rain, until that ordinary Tuesday afternoon when everything changed. The sun had begun its descent behind the houses across the street, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, when Tommy first saw the dog standing on the other side of the gate. The German shepherd's presence was like a period at the end of a long sentence, definitive and impossible to ignore. The dog's fur was matted in places, telling stories of hard times and lonely nights, but its eyes held an intelligence that seemed to pierce straight through Tommy's carefully constructed walls. Those eyes, amber and intense, studied the boy with an awareness that made Tommy's breath catch in his throat. For the first time in months, he felt truly seen. The German shepherd stood perfectly still, its ears alert but not aggressive, its posture suggesting neither threat nor submission. Tommy reached into his pocket, fingers closing around the half sandwich he'd saved from lunch. Slowly, carefully, he withdrew it, the wax paper crinkling in the evening quiet. "Are you hungry?" Tommy whispered, his voice rough from disuse. The dog's ears twitched at the sound, but it made no move toward the offered food. Instead, it continued its steady gaze, as if waiting for something more important than a meal. The moment stretched between them like a thread of spider's silk, delicate but unbreakable. In that silence, Tommy felt something shift inside him, like a key turning in a long-locked door. Without fully understanding why, he rose to his feet, the sandwich still clutched in his hand. The gate's hinges protested as Tommy reached for the latch, their screech seeming to echo across the neighborhood. His father's warnings about strange animals flickered through his mind, But something about this dog, about this moment, felt different from all the cautionary tales he'd ever heard. As the gate swung open, the setting sun cast both boy and dog in silhouette, their shadows merging on the dusty ground. The German Shepherd remained still, watching as Tommy took one small step forward, then another. The distance between them decreased inch by inch, until Tommy could see the flecks of gold in the dog's eyes, could hear its steady breathing. The sandwich in Tommy's hand trembled slightly as he extended it. The dog glanced at the offering but made no move to take it. Instead, it took a single step forward, closing the final gap between them. Its presence brought with it a sense of warmth and security that Tommy hadn't felt since his mother's passing. "My name's Tommy," he said softly, letting his hand drop to his side, the sandwich forgotten. The dog's tail moved slightly, not quite a wag but an acknowledgement. As the last rays of sunlight painted the world in gold, Tommy felt something he hadn't experienced in a very long time. Hope. Neither boy nor dog was aware that this moment would change both their lives forever. They couldn't know that this simple act, a gate being opened, trust being offered, would set in motion events that would transform not just their own stories, but the story of Cedar Grove itself. They stood together in the growing dusk, two lonely souls finding each other at exactly the right moment, as the world held its breath and waited to see what would happen next. The crickets began their evening song, the gentle soundtrack to this unexpected meeting. A cool breeze rustled through the unkempt grass, carrying with it the promise of change. Tommy reached out slowly, his hand hovering in the space between them. The German Shepherd lowered its head slightly, and then, with infinite gentleness, pressed its muzzle against Tommy's palm. The contact sent a jolt through Tommy's body, not of fear but of recognition. The dog's fur was coarse but warm, its presence solid and reassuring. For the first time in what felt like forever, Tommy felt the corners of his mouth turn up in a genuine smile. As darkness settled over Cedar Grove, the streetlights flickered to life one by one, creating pools of yellow light that dotted the neighborhood like fallen stars. The dog stayed close to Tommy, its body language relaxed but alert, as if it had found something it had been searching for all along. Tommy knew he should go inside. His father would be home soon, and there would be questions about the large dog standing in their yard. But for now, in this moment suspended between day and night, he allowed himself to simply exist in the presence of this unexpected companion. The German Shepherd's coat, despite its unkempt appearance, held hints of the magnificent animal it must have once been, or could be again. Beneath the dirt and tangles, Tommy could see the proud bearing that was characteristic of the breed. There were old scars visible through the fur, telling tales of hardship that Tommy understood all too well. As they stood together in the growing darkness, a car passed by on the street, its headlights sweeping across the yard. The dog tensed slightly but didn't move from Tommy's side. Its loyalty, already evident in these first few moments, spoke of a depth of character that transcended its rough appearance. The sound of a distant truck engine broke the spell. Tommy recognized the particular rumble of his father's vehicle. The dog's ears perked up, but it showed no sign of wanting to run. Instead, it looked at Tommy with those intelligent eyes, as if asking what would happen next. "You should probably go," Tommy whispered, though his heart ached at the thought. But the German Shepherd stood its ground, steady and sure, like it had made a decision of its own. The rumble of the truck grew louder, and Tommy's pulse quickened with anxiety and hope. The headlights swept into the driveway, illuminating boy and dog in harsh white light. Tommy heard the truck doors slam, followed by his father's tired footsteps on the gravel. There was a moment of absolute stillness as Jack Mitchell rounded the corner of the house and saw his son standing in the darkening yard with a large German Shepherd. "Tommy?" Jack's voice carried a note of barely controlled panic. "Don't move, son." But Tommy didn't feel afraid. He placed his hand on the dog's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth beneath his fingers. "It's okay, Dad," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in months. "He's not going to hurt anyone." The German Shepherd turned its head to look at Jack, its posture remaining calm and non-threatening. In that moment, something passed between man and dog. An understanding, perhaps, or at least the beginning of one. Jack took a careful step forward, his work boots crunching on the gravel. Where did it come from? He asked, his voice softer now, though still wary. He was outside the gate, Tommy replied, his hand still resting on the dog's fur. I think he needs us, Dad. Jack Mitchell looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something he hadn't seen in a long time. A spark of life in those young eyes. The German shepherd sat down next to Tommy, its presence protective yet gentle, and Jack felt the weight of a decision settling on his shoulders. The evening air grew cooler as father, son, and dog stood in a triangle of uncertain possibility. A moth fluttered around the porch light, casting erratic shadows. From somewhere down the street came the sound of a door closing, a TV being turned on, the normal sounds of life continuing while this extraordinary moment unfolded in the Mitchells' front yard. Jack ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Tommy recognized from moments when his father was wrestling with a difficult choice. The German shepherd watched him with those remarkable eyes, patient and somehow knowing, as if it understood exactly what hung in the balance. He's really dirty, Tommy said into the silence, his voice small but hopeful. Maybe we could at least give him a bath? The question hung in the air between them, carrying with it all the weight of Tommy's loneliness, all the unspoken grief they'd been carrying, all the possibility of something new and unexpected entering their carefully ordered world of loss. Jack looked at the dog again, noting the intelligent eyes, the proud bearing despite its bedraggled appearance. He saw how his son stood straighter, seemed more present than he had in months. Sometimes, he realized, the most important decisions come disguised as simple choices. A bath, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion he couldn't quite name. We'll start with a bath. Tommy's smile illuminated the gathering darkness, and the German shepherd's tail wagged slightly, as if it understood the significance of the moment. As they made their way toward the house, the dog walking calmly between father and son, none of them could know that this was just the beginning of a story that would change not only their lives but the entire community of Cedar Grove. The porch light cast a warm glow as they approached the house, and for the first time in too long, it felt like they were walking towards something rather than away from it. The German shepherd paused at the bottom of the steps, looking up at Jack as if asking permission. Come on, Jack said softly, gesturing toward the door. Let's see what we can do about getting you cleaned up. As they crossed the threshold, the dog's nails clicking against the wooden floor, Tommy felt a shift in the air of the house itself. The rooms that had felt too empty for so long seemed to fill with a new kind of presence, a promise of something different. The bathroom light flickered on, torch fluorescent, replacing the gentle evening glow. Jack rolled up his sleeves, still in his work clothes, dust from the construction site mixing with dog hair and water as they began the task of washing their unexpected guest. The German shepherd stood patiently in the tub, accepting the warm water with dignified grace, as the dirt and grime washed away. Revealing the true color of his coat, Tommy and Jack began to see glimpses of the magnificent animal beneath. Look, Dad, Tommy exclaimed as he worked the shampoo into thick fur. He's got these amazing markings. The black and tan coloring emerged like a painting being restored, each pass of the washcloth revealing more of the dog's natural beauty. The German shepherd remained still, only occasionally shaking his head when water trickled near his ears, his eyes never leaving Tommy's face. Jack found himself absorbed in the task, his practiced hands gentle as they worked through matted fur and old tangles. The warm water filled the bathroom with steam, carrying with it the scent of dog shampoo and something else, possibility, perhaps, or hope. The mirror fogged up, obscuring their reflections, turning them into soft-edged shapes working in comfortable silence. He must have belonged to someone once, Jack mused, carefully working through a particularly stubborn knot. German shepherds like this don't just appear out of nowhere. The dog's ears twitched at his voice, but he remained steady, allowing the ministrations with a patience that spoke of previous training. Tommy's small hands moved carefully over the dog's shoulders, his touch gentle but sure. Maybe he was looking for us, he said quietly, and something in his voice made Jack pause. The simple statement hung in the steamy air, heavy with meaning that neither of them could fully articulate. As they worked, evidence of the dog's past emerged. Old scars beneath the fur, a notch in one ear, the slightly awkward way he held his back left leg. Each mark told a story of survival, of resilience, of a journey that had somehow led him to their gate on this particular evening. "We'll need to take him to a vet," Jack said, running his hands down the dog's flanks, feeling for injuries or problems that might need attention. "Make sure he's healthy. Check for a microchip." He didn't mention what would happen if they found the dog's original owners. That bridge could be crossed later. The German shepherd turned his head slightly, meeting Jack's eyes with that uncanny intelligence. There was something in that gaze that made Jack's chest tighten, a wisdom, a knowing, as if the dog understood far more than any animal should. Water dripped steadily into the drain, carrying away months or perhaps years of hardship. Tommy worked the shampoo into a lather around the dog's neck, careful to avoid his eyes. "Can we call him Guardian?" he asked suddenly. Because he looks like he could protect people, like in the stories Mom used to read to me." The mention of Sarah caught Jack off guard. Tommy rarely spoke of his mother anymore. The German shepherd seemed to sense the shift in mood, pressing his wet body gently against Tommy's side in what could only be described as a gesture of comfort. "Guardian," Jack repeated, testing the name. The dog's ears perked forward, and his tail moved slightly, creating small waves in the bathwater. "Seems like he approves." As they rinsed the last of the shampoo away, Guardian's true magnificence became apparent. Despite the hardships he had clearly endured, his bearing remained noble, his presence commanding respect even while standing in a suburban bathtub on a Tuesday evening. Tommy reached for one of their old towels, but Jack stopped him. "Hold on, buddy. Let me get the good ones from the hall closet." He returned with their newest bath towels, the ones Sarah had bought on sale at Macy's, the ones they'd been saving for company. Something about this moment felt worthy of the good towels. Guardian stood patiently as they dried him, his fur slowly fluffing up into a halo around his body. The bathroom mirror began to clear as the steam dissipated, revealing their reflection, father and son working together, the large dog between them creating a bridge of sorts, filling a space that had been empty for too long. "He's going to need food," Tommy said, rubbing Guardian's ears with the corner of the towel. "And maybe a bed." Jack looked around their small bathroom, at the puddles on the floor, the wet towels, the evidence of their impromptu dog washing adventure. He thought about the empty dog bed in the garage, the one that had belonged to their old family dog, Max, who had passed away a year before Sarah's illness. He thought about how the house had grown too quiet, too still, too heavy with absence. "Tell you what," he said, surprising himself with the words even as they left his mouth. "Why don't we go to the pet store? They're open late on Tuesdays. We can get some proper dog food, maybe a new bed." The smile that broke across Tommy's face was like sunrise after a long night. Guardian shook himself one final time, sending droplets of water flying across the bathroom. In the fluorescent light, his coat gleamed with health that was returning by the minute. He sat down between them, his posture perfect, his presence somehow making the small bathroom feel less like a room and more like the beginning of something new. They dried the floor together, Tommy chattering about what color bed Guardian might like, what kind of food they should get, whether he might need toys. Jack found himself smiling, really smiling, for what felt like the first time in months. Guardian watched them work, his eyes moving between father and son, his tail sweeping the floor in slow, contented arcs. As they finished cleaning up, Guardian followed them out of the bathroom, his nails clicking softly on the hardwood floors. He moved through the house with a curious mixture of caution and familiarity, as if he were learning the space while simultaneously claiming it as his own. In the hallway, he paused at the wall of family photos, his nose twitching as he studied the images. There was Sarah, forever frozen in moments of joy, at the beach, at Tommy's 5th birthday party, in the backyard garden she had loved so much. Guardian stood there longer than seemed normal for a dog, his eyes moving from picture to picture as if he were memorizing each one. Tommy watched him, a thoughtful expression on his young face. "I think he wants to know about our family," he said softly. "I think he wants to understand." Jack felt his throat tighten at the simple observation. He reached out and placed a hand on Guardian's head, feeling the still damp fur beneath his palm. The dog leaned slightly into his touch, offering comfort even as he received it. "Come on," Jack said, his voice rough with emotion. "Let's get to the pet store before they close. Guardian needs his own things if he's going to be part of this family." The word family hung in the air between them, delicate but unmistakable. Tommy's eyes widened slightly, and Guardian's tail began to wag with more enthusiasm. None of them moved for a moment, letting the weight of that word settle around them like a warm blanket. Finally, Guardian stood and walked to the front door, sitting precisely where a well-trained dog should sit while waiting to go out. His posture was perfect, his bearing regal despite his recent hardships. He looked back at them expectantly, as if to say, "Well, are we going?" Tommy rushed to get his shoes, his movements energized in a way Jack hadn't seen in far too long. Guardian watched him with patient affection, his eyes tracking the boy's excited movements. When Tommy stumbled slightly in his haste, Guardian moved instantly to his side, offering his solid presence as support. Jack grabbed his keys from the hook by the door, the familiar weight feeling somehow different in his hand. The house keys clinked against his work truck key, a sound that had become associated with leaving, with absence, with the heavy responsibility of being both mother and father. But tonight, that simple sound seemed to carry a new note, one of return, of presence, of possibility. As they stepped out into the evening air, the porch light illuminated their path to the truck. The neighborhood had grown quiet, houses lit from within like paper lanterns, each containing its own universe of family dinners and evening routines. Their house had been dark for so long, both literally and metaphorically, but tonight something had changed. Guardian jumped into the truck bed with easy grace, settling himself against the cab as if he'd done it 1,000 times before. His fur had dried into a soft fluff that caught the streetlight, making him look almost ethereal. Tommy climbed into the passenger seat, his face animated as he talked about what they should buy at the pet store. As Jack started the engine, he caught sight of their reflection in the rearview mirror. His son's excited face, Guardian's noble profile in the truck bed behind them, his own expression softer than it had been in months. The mirror fogged slightly with the evening's humidity, blurring the edges of their reflection, making it look almost like a painting, a moment captured in time, the beginning of something new. The truck's headlights cut through the gathering dusk as they backed out of the driveway. Guardian stood in the truck bed, his nose lifted to catch the evening breeze, his presence solid and reassuring in the rearview mirror. As they drove toward the pet store, Jack realized that for the first time since Sarah's passing, they weren't just leaving the house, they were heading somewhere together, as a family. The streets of Cedar Grove passed by their windows, familiar yet somehow different, as if the presence of Guardian in their lives had already begun to change how they saw their world. Tommy pointed out places they could take him for walks, parks where they could play fetch, neighbors who might want to meet him. Guardian rode regally in the truck bed, his bearing that of a knight returning to his castle rather than a stray who had wandered into their lives mere hours ago. His fur ruffled in the wind, and several times Jack caught him looking ahead, as if he too were eager to see what the future held for this newly formed family. The pet store's fluorescent signs came into view, a beacon of promise in the growing darkness. As Jack pulled into the parking lot, he realized that this simple trip to buy dog supplies felt like more than just an errand. It felt like a declaration, a commitment, a step forward out of the shadows of grief and into something new. Guardian jumped down from the truck with fluid grace, immediately moving to Tommy's side as the boy climbed out of the passenger seat. Together, the three of them walked toward the store's entrance, their shadows merging and separating under the parking lot lights, creating a new pattern, a new story beginning to unfold.